Following her through the streets, he watches from the shadows as three small figures race toward her. When the streetlight illuminates their faces, revealing eyes identical to his own, his world shatters and rebuilds in a single heartbeat. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The crystal chandeliers of Le Bernardin cast a soft glow across the dining room as Manhattan's elite savored each morsel of exquisitely prepared seafood. In the kitchen, a controlled chaos reigned, a symphony of clattering pans, sizzling oil, and precise commands barked in English and French. Gabrielle Johnson stood in the eye of this storm, her dark hands moving with balletic precision as she arranged microgreens on a plate of poached monkfish. At 26, she was the only black woman in the kitchen, and certainly the only one from Harlem who had climbed to the position of assistant chef in one of New York's most prestigious restaurants. "Johnson, the herbs are too heavy-handed," Chef Laurent criticized, passing by her station without a second glance. "This isn't soul food." Gabrielle bit her tongue, adjusting the garnish with steady fingers. She had graduated top of her class at culinary school, had worked 16-hour days for 4 years to earn her position, yet comments like these were a daily occurrence. "Yes, chef," she replied, keeping her voice neutral even as her colleague Pierre smirked from the station beside her. Pierre, whose plating was consistently imprecise but who had attended the same Swiss culinary academy as Laurent, rarely received such criticism. From the small window connecting the kitchen to the dining room, a pair of steel-blue eyes watched the exchange. James Woodley, heir to the Woodley Investments fortune, sat alone at his regular table, more interested in the kitchen dynamics than the Michelin-starred meal before him. At 32, James embodied old Manhattan money, tailored Tom Ford suit, Patek Philippe watch, and a confident smile that suggested the world was designed for his pleasure. He had been coming to Le Bernardin twice weekly for a month, always requesting a table with a view of the kitchen. "Monsieur Woodley," the maitre d' approached his table with a bow. "How are you enjoying your meal this evening?" "Exceptional as always," James replied, his gaze still fixed on the kitchen window. The flavors in the second course were remarkable, a subtle fusion of traditional French technique with something unexpected. "Cajun? No, something more nuanced." "I believe that would be Chef Johnson's creation. She has introduced several new preparations that Chef Laurent has approved." James raised an eyebrow. "I'd like to compliment the chef responsible." Minutes later, Gabrielle wiped her hands nervously on her apron as Chef Laurent scowled. "Table 7 wants to meet you. A Woodley, the investment family. Don't embarrass the restaurant." Gabrielle stepped into the dining room, immediately feeling underdressed in her kitchen whites compared to the evening gowns and tailored suits surrounding her. James Woodley stood as she approached, his height and confidence commanding the space around him. "Chef Johnson," he extended his hand, "your monkfish was extraordinary. The use of sassafras and file powder. It evoked Louisiana without overwhelming the delicacy of the fish." Surprise flickered across Gabrielle's face. Most patrons couldn't identify ingredients beyond salt and pepper, let alone the subtle spices she'd incorporated from her grandmother's recipes. "You have an exceptional palate, Mr. Woodley." "James, please." His smile revealed perfect teeth. "I'm something of a culinary enthusiast. The way you've married classical French techniques with African-American flavor profiles, it's revolutionary." Their conversation lasted only minutes, but Gabrielle returned to the kitchen with flushed cheeks and a rare sense of being truly seen for her culinary vision. 3 hours later, Gabrielle unlocked the door to her fifth-floor walk-up in Harlem. The apartment was small but meticulously organized, cookbooks lining every available shelf. She kicked off her shoes and moved to the window, gazing at the glittering skyline of downtown Manhattan, a world she accessed daily but never truly belonged to. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Tanisha. "How was work? Any more comments from that racist sous chef?" Before Gabrielle could respond, an email notification appeared from james.woodley@woodleyinvestments.com. Subject, Your Culinary Perspective. Miles away, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, James closed his laptop after sending the email. On his screen was Gabrielle's culinary school profile, her resume, and several food blog mentions of the rising star hiding in Le Bernardin's kitchen. Her journey from a Harlem community college to the kitchens of Manhattan's elite establishments was impressive, the kind of American dream story that made for excellent dinner conversation. The fact that she was breathtakingly beautiful with a talent that matched his own appreciation for fine cuisine made her all the more intriguing. 2 nights later, Gabrielle was surprised to find James waiting beside his Bentley outside the restaurant's service entrance. "Chef Johnson," he called as she pulled her coat tighter against the autumn chill. "I was hoping to catch you." "Mr. Woodley? How did you know?" "I noticed this is where the staff exits," he explained smoothly. "I wondered if you might allow me to drive you home. It's nearly midnight, and I'd feel better knowing you arrived safely." Gabrielle hesitated. Men like James Woodley didn't offer rides to women like her without expectations. "I appreciate the offer, but I take the subway." "At least let me drive you to the station," he persisted, opening the passenger door. The leather interior glowed invitingly. Against her better judgment, Gabrielle accepted. Instead of heading to the subway, however, their conversation flowed so naturally that she found herself directing him to her neighborhood, pointing out the jazz club where her uncle used to play saxophone, the community garden where she first learned about fresh ingredients, and the soul food restaurant where her mother had waitressed for 20 years. "This is my world," she explained as they idled outside her apartment building, acutely aware of how the Bentley stood out on her block. "Quite different from yours, I imagine." James studied her face in the dim car light. Different worlds can create the most interesting conversations. The next morning, an elaborate arrangement of white orchids arrived at Le Bernardin's kitchen, addressed to Chef Johnson. Her colleagues whispered and speculated as she read the card, "To New Culinary Horizons, J.W." That evening, Gabrielle called Tanisha while chopping vegetables for her dinner. "Girl, he's James Woodley," Tanisha emphasized, "as in Woodley Tower, Woodley Financial, Woodley Foundation. That family has buildings named after them. They don't date girls from Harlem, they hire them." "It's not dating," Gabrielle protested. "He's interested in my cooking, my perspective on fusion cuisine." "Uh-huh. And I'm interested in quantum physics when I watch The Bachelor." Tanisha's skepticism came through clearly. "Just be careful. Men like that think everything has a price tag." Despite her friend's warnings, Gabrielle couldn't help the flutter in her stomach when James invited her to a private tasting at a new restaurant the following week. She wore her only designer piece, a black dress found at a consignment shop, while he arrived in what was clearly one of many custom suits. Their dinner conversation flowed from cuisine to travel, art to music. James was knowledgeable and attentive, asking about her culinary inspirations with genuine interest. He spoke of his Harvard education and world travels, but also listened when she described learning to cook alongside her grandmother. 2 weeks later, James invited Gabrielle to his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The apartment was everything she imagined: minimalist luxury, priceless art, and a kitchen that made her professional workspace look modest by comparison. On his terrace, with Manhattan glittering below them, James handed her a glass of champagne. "To breaking boundaries," he toasted. As their glasses clinked, Gabrielle felt momentarily dizzy from the altitude, the champagne, and the intensity of his steel-blue gaze. "Why me?" she finally asked. "You could dine with socialites, models, heiresses." "They bore me," he replied simply. "You create, you transform, you see possibilities where others see limitations." His fingers brushed hers as he took her glass. "Besides, I've never tasted anything as honest as your cooking." Their first kiss tasted of expensive champagne and unspoken promises. His hands were smooth against her skin, untouched by the burns and calluses that marked her years in professional kitchens. Later that night, as they shared more champagne, Gabriel asked why he always requested private dining rooms or invited her to his home rather than public restaurants. "It's for your protection as much as mine," James explained, his fingers trailing along her arm. "The culinary world is traditional, hierarchical. If they see you socializing with patrons, especially me, it could undermine your professional credibility." "And what about your world? Would they not approve of you dating a chef from Harlem?" Something flickered behind his eyes, so quickly she almost missed it. "My world is tedious and judgmental," he said carefully. "I'm protecting what we have from unnecessary complications. Discretion benefits us both." Gabrielle nodded, accepting his explanation despite the slight unease it created. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not as a black woman fighting for respect in a white male-dominated industry, but as a culinary artist with valuable perspectives. The following Sunday, she invited James to her apartment, preparing a 5-course meal that reimagined her childhood favorites through the lens of her classical training. Southern black-eyed peas became an elegant velouté. Her grandmother's spicy fried chicken was transformed into a delicate confit with crispy skin. Collard greens were reimagined as a refined accompaniment to seared foie gras. James watched her cook with fascination, occasionally helping but mostly observing her confident movements around the small kitchen. "You're extraordinary," he murmured as they ate. "You make magic in this tiny space. Imagine what you could do with proper resources." That night, as Gabrielle slept beside him on her worn sheets, James studied her face in the glow of the streetlight filtering through her window. His gaze traveled from her peaceful expression to the framed culinary school diploma on her wall, then to his cashmere coat hanging incongruously next to her chef whites. Something calculating passed behind his eyes as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her skin was warm beneath his fingertips, her breathing deep and trusting. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression shifting subtly between genuine affection and something cooler, more assessing. While Gabrielle drifted in dreams of Michelin stars and respect, she couldn't have imagined that in just 3 months she would be alone in a freezing apartment, carrying the heirs to the Woodley Empire in her womb without a penny to her name. James studied Gabrielle's sleeping form with a mixture of fascination and calculation, his manicured fingers tracing the curve of her shoulder. The city lights filtered through her thin curtains, painting shadows across her small bedroom. In sleep, she looked younger, vulnerable, a stark contrast to the fierce concentration she displayed in Le Bernardin's kitchen. The midnight feast she had prepared for him still lingered on his palate, her reimagined soul food speaking of history, family, and innovation. No woman in his social circle could create such honest emotion on a plate. Certainly not the debutantes and socialites his mother paraded before him at charity galas. 2 weeks later, Gabrielle entered James's penthouse kitchen, her eyes widening at the midnight surprise laid out before her. On the marble island sat a handcrafted wooden box, its surface gleaming under the recessed lighting. "Open it," James urged, pouring her a glass of champagne. Gabrielle lifted the lid carefully, gasping at what lay inside, a complete set of handcrafted Japanese knives, each blade bearing a subtle engraving. "These are Hattori blades," she whispered, lifting one with reverence. "They cost thousands." "For the best chef in New York," James said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Your talent deserves proper tools." As she tested the perfect balance of the Santoku knife, James watched her with a satisfied smile. The gift had achieved its intended effect. Her eyes shone with emotion, her gratitude palpable. "No one has ever given me anything like this," she admitted, carefully returning the knife to its velvet bed. "That's because no one sees you the way I do," he replied, his lips brushing her ear. "Your potential is limitless." The following Monday, Chef Laurent summoned Gabrielle to his office. She entered cautiously, prepared for criticism. "Johnson," he said, studying a clipboard, "we're adjusting the spring menu. Your scallop preparation with the sassafras infusion, we'll feature it as a signature dish." Gabrielle blinked in surprise. "Thank you, chef. I'm honored." "You're being promoted to junior sous chef," he continued, not meeting her eyes. "Effective immediately. The board specifically requested it." Later, she called James from the locker room, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I got promoted! Junior sous chef!" There was a pause on the line before James responded, his voice distracted. "That's wonderful, darling. Listen, I'm in the middle of something. Market fluctuations in Hong Kong. Can I call you tonight?" Gabrielle's smile dimmed slightly. "Of course. Just wanted to share the news." "We'll celebrate properly this weekend," he promised before ending the call. 3 days later, Gabrielle found herself in James's Bentley, headed east on the Long Island Expressway. The early summer countryside rolled past as he explained their destination. "The Hamptons house has been in my family for generations," he said casually. "It's quieter this time of year, before the season officially begins." The Woodley estate took Gabrielle's breath away, a sprawling shingle-style mansion overlooking the Atlantic, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. A gray-haired man in a pressed uniform opened James's car door with practiced deference. "Welcome back, Mr. Woodley." "Thank you, Harrison. We'll be staying until Sunday evening." As they entered the grand foyer, Gabrielle felt acutely out of place. Oil paintings of stern-faced Woodleys lined the walls, their pale eyes following her movements. The furniture looked too delicate to touch, each piece probably worth more than her annual salary. James gave her a brief tour, speaking of summer galas and childhood sailing lessons as if everyone grew up with such privileges. In the massive kitchen, Gabrielle ran her fingers across the La Cornue range with reverence, the culinary equivalent of a Stradivarius. Their first evening passed pleasantly, with Gabrielle preparing dinner using the bounty from local farms, while James opened a bottle from the estate's wine cellar. As they ate on the terrace, watching the sunset over the Atlantic, James seemed more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Have you thought about our future?" she asked tentatively, emboldened by the romantic setting. James's expression shifted subtly. "The future? I mean, where this is going. United States." His fingers tapped lightly on the stem of his wine glass. "I prefer to enjoy the present, particularly when it's as perfect as this moment." Before Gabrielle could press further, the terrace doors opened. A uniformed housekeeper appeared, startling visibly at Gabrielle's presence. "Mrs. Collins," James said smoothly. "I didn't realize you were coming this evening." "The usual Friday turndown, Mr. Woodley. I apologize for interrupting." "Not at all. This is my friend, Gabrielle. She's a chef at Le Bernardin." The way he hesitated before "friend" wasn't lost on Gabrielle, nor was the way his hand reached for hers beneath the table, squeezing gently as if in warning. When the housekeeper departed, James rose quickly. "We should move inside. It's getting chilly." Later that night, as moonlight streamed through the bedroom windows, Gabrielle broached the subject again. "You didn't want her to see me." James sighed, rolling onto his side to face her. "It's not that simple. The staff gossip, and my family has relationships with these people going back decades. So I'm a secret?" "You're private," he corrected, stroking her hair. "What we have is too special to share with the world just yet. Trust me, I'm protecting us both." The next morning, James's phone rang during breakfast. He checked the display and frowned. "I need to take this," he said, moving toward his study. "Business never stops, unfortunately." Curious, Gabrielle approached the study door minutes later, hearing James's voice rise in irritation. "Mother, I told you I'm unavailable this weekend. No, I won't be attending the Ashford Gala. Because I have other commitments. It's not your concern. Vanessa Astor is not my priority right now." 2 weeks later, Flipping through Vanity Fair in her apartment, Gabrielle froze at a photo of James at a charity event. He stood smiling beside a willowy blonde woman, his hand resting comfortably on her lower back. The caption read, "James Woodley and Vanessa Astor at the Metropolitan Museum benefit." When confronted, James dismissed her concerns with practiced ease. "Vanessa's father is a key investor. It's purely business. These functions are part of my job. Surely you understand professional obligations." Gabrielle nodded, though unease lingered. That night, James orchestrated a dinner that would dissolve her doubts. A private chef preparing a 7-course meal in his penthouse, candlelight bathing the room in golden warmth, Dom Perignon chilling in silver buckets. "I've been thinking about what you said in the Hamptons," he murmured as they watched the city lights from his terrace. "About our future." Gabrielle's heart quickened. "You have?" "You're extraordinary, Gabrielle. When I'm with you, the rest of the world fades away. You make me feel authentic." "Is that why you keep me separate from your world?" Something flickered in his eyes. "My world is artificial, all performance and calculation. What we have here is real." He kissed her deeply. "You're everything I needed without realizing it." The following weekend, James canceled their plans at the last minute. Gabrielle, already dressed in the designer gown he'd sent to her apartment, received his text with disappointment. "Crisis at work. Can't get away. We'll make it up to you." Alone in her apartment, she channel-surfed aimlessly until landing on coverage of the New York Botanical Garden Gala. The camera panned across arriving guests, lingering on James escorting the same blonde woman from the magazine. They looked perfectly matched, both tall, aristocratic, gleaming with inherited privilege. A week later, in James's penthouse, Gabriel entered his home office to borrow a pen. On his desk lay financial documents bearing the Astor Developments logo marked "Merger Considerations, Confidential." When James appeared in the doorway, his expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into a smile. "Finding everything you need?" "Just a pen," she answered, watching as he gathered the documents swiftly into a folder. "These boring financial matters," he said lightly. "Nothing that would interest you." That night, as they lay in his California king bed, James propped himself on one elbow, studying her face. "Tell me more about growing up in Harlem. Your family's been there for generations?" "3 generations," she confirmed. "My grandfather moved from South Carolina during the Great Migration." "And your parents? What did they do?" "Mom was a waitress. Dad drove a cab until he left when I was 8. James's fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. "That must have been difficult. No college fund, I imagine? No family connections to help your career?" "We made do," Gabrielle replied, suddenly self-conscious. "My grandmother taught me to cook. She said good food was the great equalizer. Even rich people can recognize when something tastes like love." A strange smile played at James's lips. An interesting philosophy. The conversation left Gabrielle unsettled, though she couldn't articulate why. James's questions seemed innocent enough, yet something in his tone suggested he was cataloging differences rather than seeking understanding. 2 nights later, while James took a business call, Gabrielle stepped onto his terrace. Manhattan sprawled before her, a glittering promise of possibility. From this height, Harlem was just another collection of lights to the north. She imagined bringing her future children to this terrace, showing them the city from this privileged vantage point, teaching them to navigate both worlds she now straddled. Behind her, James spoke in hushed tones on his phone. "No, I haven't told her about Tokyo yet. It's only 6 months. She doesn't need to know everything. Trust me, I have it under control." In an autumn evening, gazing at the pregnancy test's positive result in her trembling hands, Gabrielle smiled with certainty that this baby would be the definitive bond uniting her world with James's, a belief that would be shattered within 24 hours. Gabrielle's heart fluttered with nervous anticipation as she meticulously arranged a selection of delicate amuse-bouches on a hand-painted porcelain plate. The kitchen of Le Bernardin stood eerily quiet at 11:30 in the evening, the usual chaos of service replaced by the soft hum of refrigerators and the occasional drip from a faucet. She had asked the night manager for permission to use the kitchen after hours, a request granted only because she'd become one of the restaurant's rising stars. The positive pregnancy test had been sitting in her purse for 2 days now. 2 days of nervous smiles, of hand pressed against her still flat stomach when no one was looking, of practicing the words she would say to James. Tonight would change everything. She smoothed the wrinkles from her chef's coat and glanced at the bottle of sparkling cider chilling in an ice bucket. No champagne. Not anymore. Not for her, anyway. James could have champagne if he wished, but she had already begun making sacrifices for the tiny life growing inside her. The heavy service door swung open, and James appeared, his custom Burberry trench coat dusted with December snowflakes. He checked his Patek Philippe watch with a slight frown. "This is unexpected," he said, unwinding his cashmere scarf. "I have a late meeting with Japanese investors at 1. I can't stay long." "I know your time is valuable," Gabrielle said, her voice steadier than she felt. But this couldn't wait. She guided him to the small table she'd prepared in the corner of the kitchen, away from the windows. A single candle illuminated the space between them, casting long shadows across the stainless steel countertops. "You've gone to some trouble," James observed, taking his seat. His eyes scanned the pristine kitchen. "Where is everyone?" "I asked for privacy," Gabrielle replied, serving the first small plate, a sea scallop with citrus and her signature sassafras foam. "I wanted tonight to be special." James sampled the dish, his appreciation evident but distracted. "It's excellent as always, but surely this could have waited for the weekend. I'm in the middle of a complex negotiation with—" "I'm pregnant, James." The words hung in the air between them. Gabrielle placed a hand protectively over her abdomen, watching James's face for his reaction. For a moment, his expression remained frozen, fork suspended halfway to his mouth, eyes fixed on hers. Then something shifted. The warmth that usually softened his features when they were alone drained away, replaced by a calculating coldness she had glimpsed only in flashes before. He set down his fork with deliberate precision. "I see," he said finally, his voice neutral. His fingers began a rhythmic tap against the tablecloth. "That's inconvenient." The word struck Gabrielle like a physical blow. "Inconvenient? That's your response to learning you're going to be a father?" James's jaw tightened. "Let's be practical about this. We've been careful. How did this happen?" "I don't know," she whispered, her prepared speech evaporating from her mind. "These things aren't always perfect. But James, I thought you might be happy. I thought we could form a family." A laugh escaped him, sharp and humorless, like glass breaking. It was a sound she had never heard from him before. "A family?" He tilted his head, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "With you? My dear, you were a temporary distraction. Interesting, exotic even, but nothing more." Gabrielle felt the blood drain from her face. "But I thought—" "That's your problem," James cut in. "You thought too much." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a slim leather wallet. "This isn't part of my life plan, Gabrielle. Not with you." She stared at him, uncomprehending, as he extracted a checkbook. "My family would never accept a girl from Harlem carrying a Woodley air." His tone was clinical now, his pen moving across the check with practiced efficiency. "Did you really believe you could sit at a table with people who have been running this country for generations? People whose names are on buildings, hospitals, university wings?" Tears welled in Gabrielle's eyes, blurring her vision of the man she thought she knew. "I believed you when you said I was special. I believed you when you said what we had was real." James slid the check across the table. The amount, $50,000 seemed to glow accusingly in the candlelight. "This should cover everything," he said. "Resolve this situation and disappear, or my attorneys will ensure you never work in New York again. And let me be perfectly clear, a Johnson will never be worthy of the empire we've built." Gabrielle stared at the check, tears now streaming freely down her face. "I thought you loved me." James adjusted his watch, a gesture she had once found endearing but now seemed mechanical and cold. His lips curved into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Love? Between us?" The question seemed to amuse him. "You'll always be just the girl from the kitchen, Gabrielle. No refinement, no connections, no future. I don't have room for you or this child in my life." He stood, straightening his tie, a gesture of finality. "I have investors waiting. This matter is concluded." "This matter," Gabrielle repeated numbly. "That's what our baby is to you?" "There won't be a baby," James replied, his voice hardening. "Not if you're as intelligent as I gave you credit for. The choice is simple: a check that could change your life, or a ruined career and a child you can't afford to raise properly." He buttoned his coat. "I'll expect discretion. Goodbye, Gabrielle." The service door swung shut behind him, leaving Gabrielle alone with the untouched food, the melting ice, and a check that represented everything she had never wanted from him. When Chef Laurent called her into his office the following morning, Gabrielle already knew what was coming. His face was carefully arranged into a mask of professional regret. "Johnson, I'm afraid we must terminate your employment, effective immediately." "May I ask why?" she managed, though the answer was obvious. Laurent avoided her eyes. "The board feels your recent innovations have moved too far from our classical foundations. It's not a good fit anymore." "The board," she repeated hollowly. "Or one particular board member's family?" The chef's silence was answer enough. Within 20 minutes, Gabrielle was clearing out her locker, the few personal items fitting into a small cardboard box. Her colleagues moved around her like she was contagious, eyes downcast, conversations hushed. Word traveled fast in kitchen hierarchies, and the unspoken message was clear: Gabrielle Johnson was now untouchable. Pablo, a dishwasher who had always been kind to her, pressed a scrap of paper into her hand. "My cousin works at Maria," he whispered. "I told him you're the best. He will talk to the chef." Gabrielle thanked him with a tight-lipped smile, knowing it would lead nowhere. The Woodley reach was too extensive, the culinary world too small and interconnected. She stepped out into the December chill, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Snow fell steadily, the elegant flakes landing on her box of meager possessions. Standing on the sidewalk outside the restaurant where she had once been celebrated as a rising star, Gabrielle felt the full weight of her isolation. The check James had written sat crumpled in her coat pocket. $50,000, a sum that could ease her path or bind her to his cruelty forever. She had stuffed it there without deciding whether to cash it or destroy it. A gust of wind whipped down the avenue, sending snow swirling around her. Manhattan continued its relentless pace, taxis honking, pedestrians hurrying, the city indifferent to one more dream being crushed on its streets. Under the snow of Manhattan, Gabrielle Johnson swore that one day James Woodley would look at her not with pity or contempt, but with the bitter recognition of having discarded not just a love, but the greatest miscalculation of his privileged life. January in New York carried a special kind of cruelty. The holiday decorations came down, leaving behind naked trees and gray slush that stained everything it touched. Gabrielle stood in line at the unemployment office, her worn wool coat pulled tight against the biting cold. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, still flat, but carrying a secret that would soon reshape her entire body and life. "Johnson Gabrielle," the board clerk called, barely looking up from her computer. "Previous employment?" "Junior sous chef at Le Bernardin," Gabrielle answered, noticing how the woman's eyes narrowed with sudden interest. "That's a prestigious position. Reason for termination?" Gabrielle hesitated. "Creative differences." The clerk's eyes flicked to Gabrielle's hand resting on her abdomen, then back to the computer screen. The judgment was silent but unmistakable. "We'll contact you about suitable positions," she said, her tone suggesting such positions would be few and far between for a pregnant woman with no references. Over the next 2 weeks, Gabrielle called every restaurant contact in her network. Each conversation followed the same pattern: initial enthusiasm that cooled after they checked her references. The invisible hand of Woodley influence seemed to reach into every kitchen worth entering. Her savings dwindled rapidly. The December rent had emptied most of her account, and January loomed with its own demands. The crumpled check remained in her coat pocket, a temptation she refused to acknowledge. By February, desperation drove her to a fast food chain in Queens. The manager, a harried woman with tired eyes, didn't care about fine dining references. "Dish pit starts at minimum wage. Night shift only. Can you start tonight?" That evening, Gabrielle stood before an industrial sink, hands submerged in caustic detergent that left her skin raw and cracked. The professional knives that had once been extensions of her creative self were replaced by rubber gloves and steel wool. The rhythmic work allowed her mind to wander, planning her next moves while her body performed the mindless labor. In her second week at the dish pit, a pain shot through Gabrielle's abdomen. She gripped the edge of the sink, breathing through the cramp. The night manager noticed her distress. "You okay?" "You don't look so good." "I'm fine," Gabrielle insisted, straightening. "Just need a minute." The following morning, she sat in a cramped clinic waiting room, surrounded by other women with similar worried expressions. When the nurse called her name, Gabrielle followed with leaden feet, certain she was losing her baby, the final blow in James's systematic destruction of her life. The technician squirted cold gel on her stomach and moved the ultrasound wand with practiced precision. Her eyebrows lifted suddenly. "Huh," she said, adjusting a dial. "What is it?" Gabrielle's heart pounded. "Is something wrong?" The technician turned the screen toward her. "Not wrong, just more than expected. I'm seeing 3 distinct heartbeats." "3?" Gabrielle whispered, staring at the grainy image. "Congratulations, you're carrying triplets." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. 1 baby had seemed impossible to manage alone. 3 felt like an insurmountable challenge. As the technician printed images, Gabrielle's mind raced through calculations: triple the diapers, triple the formula, triple the childcare costs. Back in her tiny Queens apartment, Gabrielle spread her bills across the kitchen table. The ultrasound images sat among past due notices and final warnings. Her meager dishwashing paycheck wouldn't cover even the most basic prenatal care for a high-risk triplet pregnancy. She extracted James's check from her coat pocket, smoothing its crumpled surface. $50,000 would solve her immediate problems. It would also be an admission of defeat, an acceptance of his valuation of their children's worth. With sudden resolve, she tucked the check back into her pocket. She would find another way. March brought more rejection letters from restaurants. One executive chef had been blunt. "I heard what happened at Le Bernardin. No one wants that kind of trouble, especially not with your condition." Desperate for additional income, Gabrielle posted flyers at community centers offering cooking lessons. To her surprise, a Jamaican cultural center in Queens responded, offering their kitchen twice weekly for classes. "Most of our seniors know how to cook," the coordinator explained, "but they miss the social aspect. $20 per student, 10 students maximum. You keep half." The first class was a revelation. Teaching came naturally to Gabrielle, and the elderly participants appreciated her patience and genuine interest in their own culinary traditions. For 2 hours twice a week, she was Chef Johnson again, respected, valued, and creating something meaningful. Between dishwashing shifts and cooking classes, Gabrielle began selling her possessions. Her collection of culinary books, once her most prized possessions, went first, each volume a small heartbreak as she handed it to its new owner. The Japanese knives from James followed, though she kept one Santoku blade, refusing to part with her last professional tool. In April, during a double shift at the restaurant, the exhaustion finally caught up with her. The room spun suddenly, and the floor rose to meet her. She awoke to concerned faces and a cold compress on her forehead. "You should have told us you're carrying triplets," her manager scolded gently. "No more doubles for you." Reduced hours meant reduced pay. Gabrielle started a future fund, a repurposed coffee can where she deposited every spare coin and dollar, determined to create some security for her children before their arrival. By May, her body had transformed dramatically. Her once flat stomach now preceded her into every room, making her dish pit duties nearly impossible. The community center cooking classes became her main source of income, supplemented by occasional catering for local church events. One evening, returning from teaching, Gabrielle found an envelope that had been slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a page torn from the New York Times Society section. Her hands trembled as she read the announcement. Woodley Astor engagement. James Woodley, heir to the Woodley Investments fortune, announces his engagement to Vanessa Astor, daughter of real estate magnate Richard Astor. The couple will wed this fall at St. Patrick's Cathedral. The accompanying photo showed James in a tailored tuxedo, his arm around the willowy blonde she had seen in society pages. Both smiled radiantly, as if the life growing inside Gabrielle, 3 lives, did not exist. She made it to the bathroom before the sobs overtook her. Kneeling on the cold tile floor, arms wrapped protectively around her swollen belly, Gabrielle finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her abandonment. 6 months of stoic determination crumbled in an instant of raw grief. As tears streamed down her face, she felt it, a flutter, then a distinct kick from within, then another and another. 3 different movements, 3 different children making their presence known. Slowly, Gabrielle pulled herself up using the edge of the sink. Her reflection in the cracked mirror told a story of exhaustion. Dark circles under red-rimmed eyes, hollowed cheeks, hair hastily pulled back. But beneath the fatigue was something else, something forged in the crucible of this ordeal. "You will know only love and strength," she promised her unborn children, her voice gaining resolve with each word, "and one day the world will know he was wrong about us." The next morning, Gabrielle called her distant cousin in Boston, a woman she had met only twice at family reunions. The conversation was awkward but productive. "I can offer you my couch until you find something," her cousin said, "and I know some people in restaurants here. Boston's different from New York, smaller scene, less cutthroat." That afternoon, Gabrielle withdrew the last $200 from her account and purchased a one-way bus ticket to Boston. She packed her remaining possessions into a single suitcase. Clothes, the ultrasound images, her remaining Santoku knife, and a folder containing her recipes, the only professional legacy she had left. In a final act of defiance, she took the check from her coat pocket and tore it into tiny pieces. Then she made her way to Midtown, entering the gleaming lobby of Woodley Investments. The security guard eyed her pregnant form suspiciously as she approached the reception desk. "I have a delivery for Mr. Woodley," she said, sliding an envelope across the marble counter. Inside was a simple note, written in her clear, precise handwriting. "When you see me again, it will be you who is not enough." The next morning, with only $200 in her pocket and 3 lives pulsing in her womb, Gabrielle boarded the bus to Boston, never imagining that 15 years later she would be returning to New York in her private jet as one of the country's most powerful businesswomen. The February wind howled through Boston's narrow streets, carrying knives of cold that sliced through Gabrielle's worn coat. Her bus had arrived 3 hours late, well past midnight, leaving her to navigate an unfamiliar city with a single suitcase and a body that felt foreign even to herself. Her cousin Darlene's apartment building in Roxbury stood before her, a weathered 3-story walk-up that seemed to lean slightly to the left, as if tired of standing straight against New England winters. "This is temporary," Gabrielle whispered to her swollen belly as she climbed the stairs. "Just a beginning." not where we'll stay." Darlene opened the door in a faded bathrobe, her expression a mixture of sympathy and mild regret at her own generosity. The apartment was small, smaller than Gabrielle had anticipated, with a living room barely large enough for a second-hand couch that would become her bed for the foreseeable future. "Bathrooms down the hall," Darlene explained, already turning back toward her bedroom. "I left some towels out. I've got early shift tomorrow, so—" Alone in the darkened living room, Gabrielle carefully lowered herself onto the lumpy couch, her hand instinctively cradling her belly. 3 distinct movements responded to her touch. Her children, already forming their own personalities, already fighting to be known. "We made it to Boston," she whispered. "Now we just need to figure out the rest." The rest proved more challenging than she had anticipated. February melted into March, and Gabrielle's daily routine became a grueling circuit of restaurant inquiries followed by rejections. Boston's culinary scene was indeed smaller than New York's, but word had somehow traveled. No one said James Woodley's name, but vague references to reliability concerns and your situation made it clear she remained untouchable. On a particularly bleak Tuesday in late March, rain soaking through her shoes as she walked the narrow streets of Boston's North End, Gabrielle paused before a small storefront with steamed windows. A hand-painted sign read, "Sophia's," in faded red letters, and beneath it, a hastily taped notice, "Help wanted, kitchen staff." The interior was warm and smelled of garlic and tomatoes, the unmistakable perfume of an authentic Italian kitchen. Red checkered tablecloths covered mismatched tables, and family photos lined the walls. Behind the counter stood a tiny woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, her hands flour-dusted and eyes sharp as she assessed Gabrielle. "You need work," she stated rather than asked, her Italian accent thick even after decades in America. "Yes, ma'am," Gabrielle replied, straightening despite her exhaustion. "I'm a trained chef." The woman's eyebrow arched skeptically as she took in Gabrielle's condition. "And when are they coming?" she asked, nodding toward Gabrielle's belly. "July, if I carried a term. They're triplets." Instead of the dismissal Gabrielle had come to expect, the older woman's face softened. "Triplets? Mamma mia. My mother always said pregnant women bring good luck to kitchens." She wiped her hands on her apron and extended one to Gabrielle. "Sophia Genovese. This is my restaurant for 37 years. Gabrielle Johnson. I worked at Le Bernardin in New York until—" Her voice trailed off. Sophia waved dismissively. "New York, always so impressed with itself. Here, we care about what your hands can do, not where they did it before." She gestured toward the kitchen. "Can you make sauce? Real sauce, not that watery nonsense they serve in fancy places?" For the first time in months, Gabrielle smiled genuinely. "My grandmother taught me that sauce is the soul of cooking. You build it layer by layer, with patience and respect." Sophia nodded approvingly. "You start tomorrow, part-time only. Those babies need rest. You'll make prep sauces, bases, nothing that keeps you standing too long." The weeks that followed established a rhythm that, while exhausting, gave Gabrielle something she had lost in New York: purpose. She arrived each morning at 6, prepared stocks and sauces while seated on a stool Sophia had specially positioned, and left by early afternoon before the dinner rush began. Her pregnancy progressed rapidly, the triplets growing at an alarming rate that concerned her obstetrician. Bed rest would be ideal, the doctor advised at her 7-month checkup. "These babies are coming early, Ms. Johnson. It's just a question of how early." 2 days later, in Sophia's kitchen, a sharp pain cut through Gabrielle's lower back. She gripped the edge of the prep table, knuckles white, as liquid pooled at her feet. "Sophia!" she gasped, panic rising in her throat. "The babies! They're coming!" The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and pain. Gabrielle, strapped to a gurney, fought against terror as the paramedic radioed ahead. Multiple birth, premature labor, 7 months gestation. In the sterile brightness of the emergency room, doctors swarmed around her, voices urgent but calm. "We need to perform an emergency C-section," the surgeon explained, already prepping. "Your triplets are showing signs of distress." "Will they survive?" Gabrielle asked, her voice barely audible. The surgeon's eyes, visible above her mask, held both concern and determination. "We're going to do everything possible." Gabrielle woke hours later in recovery, disoriented and afraid. A nurse approached immediately, reading the question in her eyes. "Your sons are in the NICU," she said gently. "They're very small, but they're fighters. All three have strong heartbeats." For 2 weeks, Gabrielle lived between her hospital bed and the neonatal intensive care unit. The boys, whom she named Marcus, Malcolm, and Miles, lay in separate incubators, tiny bodies connected to machines that seemed impossibly large in comparison. Sophia visited daily, bringing food that Gabrielle barely touched and updates from the restaurant that she barely heard. On the 17th day, the neonatologist allowed Gabrielle to hold all 3 boys together for the first time. Cradling them against her chest, their combined weight still less than a single full-term baby, she made a silent promise. "You will never know rejection. You will never question your worth. You are Johnsons, and that name will mean something because of us." When the boys were finally discharged, still tiny but stable enough for home care, Gabrielle faced a new challenge. Darlene's apartment, with its lumpy couch and shared bathroom, was no place for premature triplets. It was Sophia who found the solution. "My nephew has apartment above laundromat," she announced one afternoon, pressing a key into Gabrielle's hand. "1 bedroom, not fancy but clean. Good for babies. First 3 months, no rent." The apartment was indeed small, but to Gabrielle, it was a palace. The staff from Sophia's arrived the following Saturday with second-hand cribs, a rocking chair missing one arm, and mismatched baby clothes donated by customers. By nightfall, the barren space had transformed into a home. As summer faded into fall, Gabrielle established a new routine. With the boys sleeping in their cribs, she would spread her notebooks across the kitchen table, creating recipes from memory and imagination. During their brief naps, she experimented with affordable ingredients, developing dishes that honored her heritage while incorporating techniques from her classical training. When the triplets reached 6 months, Sophia invited Gabrielle to bring them to the restaurant. "Babies belong in kitchen," she insisted. "Is family business, no?" They learn early. Sophia cleared a space in the back office, transforming it into a makeshift nursery where the boys could nap while Gabrielle worked. Customers cooed over the identical infants, and staff members took turns holding them during breaks. What had begun as employment evolved into something more, a surrogate family built around a small Italian restaurant in Boston's North End. As the boys approached their first birthday, Gabrielle's role at Sophia's expanded. The elderly chef, impressed by Gabrielle's innovations, allowed her to develop weekend specials that incorporated her unique fusion of techniques. One Friday night, Gabrielle presented Sophia with a new dish. "I call it Trilogy," she explained, setting the plate before her mentor. 3 techniques: braising, reduction, and emulsion, working in harmony, like my boys. Sophia tasted the dish, her expression transforming from curiosity to delight. "This," she declared, "goes on menu tomorrow." The following evening, a food critic from the Boston Globe happened to visit Sophia's, attracted by the restaurant's old-world charm. When he tasted Gabrielle's creation, he requested to meet the chef responsible. His subsequent review described a genius undiscovered in the back of an unassuming North End institution, and praised the trilogy as a harmonious symphony that speaks of both classical training and soulful innovation. Within days, Sophia's phone rang constantly with reservation requests. The quiet neighborhood restaurant suddenly had lines forming outside its door, customers specifically requesting that trilogy dish and asking about the mysterious chef who created it. 2 weeks after the review, Sophia called Gabrielle into her small office. On the desk lay a stack of papers and a calculator. 15%, Sophia announced without preamble. That's your share now. Partner, not employee." Gabrielle blinked in surprise. "Sophia, I can't. You bring life to my old restaurant," Sophia interrupted, pushing the papers forward. "First your babies for luck, then you're cooking for customers. We are family now, and family shares." That night, as Gabrielle rocked her 3 sons to sleep in their tiny bedroom, singing softly about dreams and possibilities, she could not have imagined that the modest dish named for her children would become, in just 5 years, the name of a brand that would revolutionize American gastronomy. Sophia carefully placed the partnership agreement on the scarred wooden table, her arthritic fingers smoothing the edges with reverence. "Sign here," she instructed, tapping a wrinkled finger on the dotted line. "From today, it's no longer just Sophia's. Now it's Sophia and Trilogy." Gabrielle's hand trembled slightly as she signed. The triplets, just celebrating their first birthday the week before, gurgled contentedly in their playpen in the corner of the restaurant office. Marcus reached for a wooden spoon. Malcolm methodically stacked plastic cups, and Miles watched the adults with curious, intelligent eyes, all 3 displaying the distinctive steel-blue gaze of their absent father. "I don't know how to thank you," Gabrielle whispered, looking up at the woman who had become more than an employer, a mentor, a friend, almost a mother. Sophia waved dismissively. "Thank me by making this place famous. Thank me by showing those New York snobs what real cooking is." She glanced at the triplets. "And raise those boys to be good men. Men who stay." The early days of partnership were challenging. The boys slept in modified produce crates in the back office while Gabrielle worked, their schedule as unpredictable as the restaurant business itself. Most nights ended with her carrying 3 sleeping toddlers up the narrow stairs to their apartment, her body aching from hours of cooking and mothering simultaneously. When the triplets turned 2, Gabrielle enrolled in night classes at Boston Community College, basic business administration. After tucking the boys into bed, she would spread textbooks across her kitchen table, forcing her exhausted mind to absorb accounting principles and marketing theories. "The food is only half the business," she explained to Sophia, who questioned the need for such education. "I need to understand every aspect if we're going to grow." Growth came steadily. The Boston Globe Review had put them on the map, and Gabrielle's weekend specials kept customers returning. By the time the triplets were 3, Sophia and Trilogy had expanded its hours and doubled its staff. The boys became fixtures in the restaurant, charming customers with their identical faces and distinctly different personalities. "Mama, taste," Marcus would insist, offering Gabrielle spoonfuls of whatever he'd concocted from scraps in the kitchen. Even at 3, his palate was developing, his interest in flavors evident. Malcolm, always the observer, would sit quietly with the accountant during monthly reviews, seemingly absorbing the columns of numbers. "More money this month," he noted once, pointing to the bottom line with surprising accuracy. Miles, sensitive and artistic, hummed constantly, transforming kitchen sounds, the rhythmic chopping of knives, the sizzle of oil, the clang of pots, into melodies that stayed in everyone's heads for days. On a crisp autumn evening when the boys were 4, a sleek black car stopped outside the restaurant. A woman in an impeccable suit entered, introducing herself as Eliza Montgomery, executive chef at Rococo, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants. "I'm here to offer you a position," she said after sampling Gabrielle's latest creation. "Executive sous chef. The salary is double what you could possibly make here." Gabrielle glanced around the homey restaurant, at Sophia instructing a new prep cook, at her sons coloring menus at the corner table, at the regular customers who knew her life story and had watched her boys grow. "I'm building something bigger," she replied, surprising herself with her confidence. "But thank you for recognizing my work." That night, after the boys were asleep, Gabrielle sketched plans in her notebook, not just for dishes, but for a future. She drew layouts for a larger restaurant, listed potential investors, calculated costs and returns. The name Trilogy featured prominently, no longer just a signature dish, but a brand in the making. The following spring, Sophia fell and broke her hip. During her recovery, Gabrielle assumed full management of the restaurant, implementing systems she'd learned in her business classes. When Sophia returned, she found streamlined operations, increased profits, and a waiting list for weekend reservations. "You should buy the building next door," Sophia suggested, watching Gabrielle juggle orders during a particularly busy service. "We need more space." The expansion into the neighboring storefront marked a turning point. Gabrielle secured a small business loan, leveraging the restaurant's consistent profits and her now completed associate's degree in business administration. The renovation doubled their capacity and added a dedicated space for the triplets, who were now 5 and starting kindergarten. The boys' first day of school was bittersweet, a milestone Gabrielle celebrated and mourned simultaneously. As she watched them enter the classroom, matching backpacks making them look even more identical, she felt a pang of both pride and sadness. "Your daddy should see you now," she whispered, too low for anyone to hear. He would realize what he missed. With the boys in school, Gabrielle focused on refining her culinary philosophy. Sophia and Trilogy began hosting special events featuring Gabrielle's unique fusion cuisine, high-level gastronomy with deep cultural roots, but at prices that made it accessible to more than just the elite. Food critics took notice, and features in culinary magazines followed. Graduation day arrived in May, the triplets now 6 years old and bursting with pride as they watched their mother receive her business degree. Dressed in matching suits that Gabrielle had splurged on, they clapped enthusiastically when her name was called. "That's our mama," Miles announced loudly to anyone who would listen. "She's the smartest, best cook in the world." As Gabrielle accepted her diploma, she scanned the crowd of families, mothers, fathers, grandparents, all celebrating together. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine James sitting beside their sons, perhaps with his arm around her shoulders. The fantasy dissolved quickly. They had built a complete life without him. His absence was no longer a wound but a faded scar. The summer the boys turned 7 brought an unexpected opportunity. A group of investors, having dined regularly at Sophia and Trilogy, approached Gabrielle with a proposition. They would finance a new restaurant, her own concept, her complete vision, in Cambridge, near Harvard. "We believe in what you're doing," explained Jonathan Hayes, the group's spokesman. "Democratizing fine dining without sacrificing quality. It's revolutionary." The meeting took place in Sophia's office. The business plan Gabrielle had been refining for years spread across the table. Sophia sat beside her, occasionally squeezing her hand in encouragement. "I would keep my partnership here," Gabrielle clarified. "This restaurant is my foundation, but Trilogy would be something different, entirely my concept." The investors agreed, impressed by her loyalty and clear vision. Construction began that fall, with Gabrielle splitting her time between running Sophia and Trilogy and designing every aspect of her new restaurant. The boys accompanied her to the construction site on weekends, offering opinions on colors and layouts with the confidence of miniature restaurateurs. Finding the perfect location in Cambridge had been Gabrielle's obsession for months. When she finally discovered the converted townhouse with its classic facade and modern interior, she knew immediately it was right. Standing in the empty space, she could visualize every detail, where each table would go, how the lighting would catch the plates, the exact shade of blue for the walls that would complement her signature dishes. The grand opening of Trilogy Cambridge was scheduled for November, giving Gabrielle barely enough time to hire staff, develop the menu, and coordinate with suppliers. The triplets, now 7 and precociously articulate, appointed themselves official taste testers, offering surprisingly insightful feedback. "More acid," Marcus suggested after sampling a fish preparation. "It needs brightness." "The plate is too busy," Malcolm observed, studying the presentation critically. "Simple is better for business." "It makes me feel happy," Miles contributed, always responding to the emotional quality of the food, like sunshine. Opening night arrived with unexpected fanfare. Word had spread through Boston's culinary community and food critics from major publications lined up alongside regular customers from Sophia and Trilogy. The boys, dressed in miniature versions of the staff uniform, proudly handed out menus and charmed the waiting guests. Sophia, seated at the best table in the house, wiped tears as she watched her protégé command the kitchen with confidence and creativity. The elderly chef had witnessed Gabrielle's evolution from desperate pregnant refugee to culinary entrepreneur, and her pride was palpable. As the evening progressed, Gabrielle moved between kitchen and dining room, greeting guests and ensuring perfection on every plate. Her signature dish, an evolved version of the original Trilogy that had first caught the Globe's attention, received audible gasps of appreciation. Among the diners was Jerome Chang, the notoriously critical food writer for the New York Times. His presence was unexpected and nerve-wracking, but Gabrielle treated his table with the same attention she gave to all her guests. When he requested to speak with her after his meal, she approached with professional composure. "Chef Johnson," he began, his expression unreadable, "what you've created here is remarkable. Not just the food, though that is exceptional, but the entire concept. You've reinvented American gastronomy by honoring its diverse roots while elevating it to fine art." His review, published the following Sunday, described Trilogy as revolutionary and Gabrielle as the most important culinary voice of her generation. Reservations flooded in, and within months, publishers approached her about a cookbook. While the first Trilogy received its Michelin star in an office in Manhattan, James Woodley absent-mindedly flipped through Food and Wine magazine, stopping abruptly upon recognizing the familiar eyes of three smiling boys standing beside the woman he had discarded. James Woodley's hands trembled as he stared at the glossy page, coffee forgotten beside him. The article title read, "Trilogy, America's New Culinary Dynasty." But it wasn't the words that captured his attention. It was the photograph. Gabrielle Johnson, poised and confident in a crisp white chef's coat, flanked by three identical boys with unmistakable steel blue eyes. His eyes. Woodley eyes. The boys appeared to be about 7 years old, their expressions varying from serious to mischievous, but all bearing the distinctive high cheekbones and striking gaze that had defined the Woodley lineage for generations. James felt a cold weight settle in his stomach as he read the caption, "Chef Gabrielle Johnson with her triplet sons, Marcus, Malcolm, and Miles, at the opening of Trilogy Cambridge." Triplets. She had been carrying triplets. The magazine slipped from his fingers as the full impact of what he had discarded hit him with the force of a physical blow. Not just a woman he had once desired, not just a child he had rejected, but 3 sons, 3 heirs to the Woodley name who would never know him, never carry his legacy. 7 years after that cold December night in Le Bernardin, Gabrielle Johnson had proven him catastrophically wrong. In Boston, unaware of her former lover's discovery, Gabrielle strode through the bustling kitchen of Trilogy Cambridge, making final adjustments to the evening's menu. At 33, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had rebuilt her life from ashes. Her once wild curls were now styled in a sophisticated twist, and the simple gold hoops in her ears were her only concession to adornment while working. "Chef, the Chicago investors are confirmed for next week," her assistant noted, falling into step beside her. "They want to discuss expansion opportunities in the Midwest." Gabrielle nodded, mentally calculating timelines and possibilities. Chicago represented more than just another restaurant. It was a strategic foothold in a new region, a chance to bring her culinary philosophy to a different audience. "Prepare the full presentation package," she instructed, "and make sure the triplets' schedule is clear. I want them to join us for the final dinner." The boys were now 10, growing as rapidly as her business empire. That evening they sat at what the staff called the family table, a special corner in the restaurant where they completed homework while occasionally sampling new dishes Gabrielle wanted to test. "Mom, what do you think of this logo?" Malcolm asked, pushing a carefully drawn design across the table. The oldest by 3 minutes, Malcolm had already shown a remarkable aptitude for business, his mathematical mind constantly analyzing opportunities and efficiencies. Gabrielle studied the sketch, a stylized T that cleverly incorporated 3 distinct elements. "It's elegant," she observed. "Simple but meaningful. For the product line?" Malcolm nodded seriously. "I think it works better than the current design, more recognizable on smaller packaging. The Trilogy product line, premium sauces, specialized spice blends, and imported olive oils, had begun as a small side project 2 years earlier. Now it generated nearly 20% of the company's revenue, with distribution in specialty food shops across New England. Marcus leaned over to examine his brother's design. "It needs color," he decided, already the artistic authority among the 3. "Maybe that deep blue you use in the restaurant?" Miles, absorbed in a book about classical composers, looked up long enough to offer his perspective. "It should be musical somehow. Logos should make you feel something." Gabrielle smiled at their easy collaboration, each bringing their distinct personality to a shared challenge. They had grown into thoughtful, creative boys, secure in their identities despite the absence of a father. 2 months later, Gabrielle sat across from Lawrence Whitman, CEO of Meridian Capital, in her sleek office overlooking Boston Harbor. The expansion plans for Trilogy Chicago lay between them, alongside a contract offering $8 million for 60% ownership of her company. "This is a generous offer," Whitman said, tapping the document. "You'd maintain creative control while we handle the business side. It's the perfect solution for a chef who wants to focus on culinary excellence rather than balance sheets." Gabrielle leaned back in her chair, studying the man whose firm had acquired and subsequently homogenized 3 other chef-driven restaurant groups in the past 5 years. "This isn't just a business, Mr. Whitman," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "It's our legacy. My sons and I built this from nothing, and we're not interested in becoming another interchangeable upscale dining experience in your portfolio." Whitman's smile tightened. "Ms. Johnson, the restaurant industry is brutally competitive. Even successful concepts can fail without proper capitalization and management." "I'm well aware of industry realities," Gabrielle countered. "I've managed to secure financing for 3 restaurants and a product line while raising triplets as a single mother. I believe my management skills are sufficient." After Whitman departed, Gabrielle gazed out at the harbor, reflecting on how far she had come. The hungry, desperate young woman who had arrived in Boston with nothing but hope and unborn children seemed like someone from another lifetime. Now she employed over 100 people and made decisions involving millions of dollars. Yet some wounds remained tender. That evening, as she helped 12-year-old Marcus perfect a sauce reduction in their home kitchen, he asked the question she had been anticipating for years. "Mom, why didn't our father want to know us?" The wooden spoon stilled in Gabrielle's hand. Miles and Malcolm, seated at the kitchen island, allegedly doing homework, suddenly became very attentive. Gabrielle chose her words carefully. "Your father wasn't ready for a family. When I told him I was pregnant, he made a choice to continue his life without us." "Because we weren't good enough?" Miles asked, his sensitive nature always quick to internalize rejection. "No," Gabrielle said firmly, setting down the spoon and gathering her sons close. "Never think that. He wasn't ready to be the man you deserved as a father. That reflects on his character, not on your worth." "What's his name?" Malcolm asked directly. Always the strategist, always wanting complete information. Gabrielle took a deep breath. "His name is James Woodley. He comes from a wealthy New York family." "Woodley," Marcus repeated, testing the name. "Is that why our eyes are this color? They don't match yours." "Yes," Gabrielle acknowledged. "You have his eyes." Over the following years, as the triplets grew into teenagers, their questions became more specific and Gabrielle's answers more honest. She told them about her time at Le Bernardin, about meeting James, about his rejection and the check he had offered to resolve the problem. She never painted him as a villain, merely as a man who had made choices based on privilege and selfishness. The summer the boys turned 14, Gabriel discovered them huddled around Malcolm's laptop, studying images of James Woodley at various society events. "He looks like us," Miles observed quietly. "Or we look like him. Says here the Woodley investments lost $60 million in bad cryptocurrency deals last year," Malcolm noted, scrolling through a financial news site. Gabriel watched from the doorway, heart aching at their curiosity about the man who had wanted no part of their lives. "Are you okay?" she asked, making her presence known. The boys exchanged glances before Malcolm spoke. "He's having financial problems," he said, turning the laptop so she could see the headline, "Woodley faces investor exodus after failed blockchain venture." Gabrielle sat beside them, choosing her words deliberately. "Your father made a choice 15 years ago. He decided that his name, his position in society, was more important than acknowledging you. That choice defined him, not you." "Would you ever want us to meet him?" Marcus asked. "That would be your decision when you're adults," Gabrielle replied honestly. "But know this, he chose not to be part of our lives, but that never defined who you are or what you could become." In March of the triplets' 15th year, Gabrielle moved her family into a luxurious penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, a symbolic ascension from the tiny apartment above Sophia's where they had begun. The boys now attended an elite private school, their natural talents nurtured by the best teachers. Malcolm excelling in mathematics and economics, Marcus winning regional culinary competitions, and Miles preparing for summer auditions at prestigious music conservatories. That evening, as Gabrielle reviewed architectural plans for the Tokyo expansion, her assistant interrupted with exciting news. "The Food and Wine Committee just called. You've been selected as Chef of the Year. The awards ceremony is in Chicago next month." Gabrielle's mind immediately went to her sons. The boys have exams that week. The ceremony's on Friday night. They could fly out after school. Gabrielle smiled, already imagining her sons beside her on stage. "Book it. I want them there with me. They're as much a part of this journey as I am." That night, in her elegant master bedroom, Gabrielle finalized her acceptance speech while trying on the custom gown she would wear, a sophisticated design in deep blue created by a young designer from Harlem whom she made a point of supporting. As she packed her suitcase, Gabrielle had no idea that thousands of miles away, James Woodley was anxiously checking the guest list for the same event, desperate for new connections that might save his collapsing investments after a series of disastrous decisions. Destiny, that force which had so cruelly separated them 15 years earlier, was now arranging their reunion on the same stage, she as the rising star, he as the shadow of a declining empire. The grand ballroom of the peninsula. Chicago glimmered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, transforming the space into a cathedral of culinary excellence. White-gloved servers glided between tables draped in ivory linen, offering flutes of Krug Grand Cuvée to guests who represented the pinnacle of America's food world. Renowned chefs, influential critics, and culinary entrepreneurs mingled in a carefully choreographed dance of networking and celebration. In a private preparation room adjacent to the ballroom, Gabrielle adjusted the collar of Malcolm's jacket, her fingers lingering on the expensive fabric. "Remember," she told her sons, "you belong here. This isn't just my achievement. We built Trilogy together." The triplets stood before her, 15 years old and already displaying the poise of young men rather than teenagers. Malcolm's analytical eyes surveyed the room with calculated interest. Marcus fidgeted with his cuffs, eager to sample the culinary offerings awaiting in the main hall. Miles, ever sensitive to atmospheres, absorbed the energy of the approaching moment. "We know, Mom," Malcolm replied, straightening to his full height, already nearly matching Gabriel's in her heels. "We've been preparing for this our whole lives." Gabriel swallowed the emotion, threatening to overflow. These remarkable young men, once tiny premature babies fighting for life in Boston hospital incubators, now stood on the precipice of extraordinary futures. futures she had carved out of rejection and despair. Across the venue, James Woodley entered the ballroom alone, his Armani suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. At 47, his once commanding presence had diminished, eroded by stress and failing ventures. He tugged nervously at his platinum cufflinks, one of the few remaining symbols of his previous prosperity. "Mr. Woodley," a young server approached with champagne, "welcome to the food and wine celebration." James accepted the glass with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He scanned the room, mentally cataloging potential investors who might salvage what remained of Woodley Investments after 3 disastrous years. His latest venture, a blockchain-based restaurant investment platform, had collapsed spectacularly, taking with it the confidence of longtime Woodley clients. He moved through the crowd with deliberate casualness, nodding to acquaintances who now greeted him with subtle reserve rather than the deference he once commanded. Several turned away as he approached, suddenly engaged in urgent conversations. "James!" Harold Blackwood, a banking associate from Harvard days, clapped him on the shoulder with forced joviality. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be in, damage control mode after that crypto business." "Just taking a breather," James replied smoothly. "Actually looking at some new food ventures. The industry's booming. Perhaps we could discuss—" "Oh, I think they're starting," Harold interrupted, gesturing toward the stage. "Should find my seat." James watched him retreat, the subtle snub stinging more than outright rejection. He took a larger swallow of champagne than intended, feeling the expensive bubbles burn down his throat. The lights dimmed slightly as the event director approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for the presentation of tonight's honoree, the visionary behind the trilogy revolution, Chef Gabriel Johnson." The crystal flute slipped from James's suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of champagne and glass. Several nearby guests stepped back with annoyed glances, but James remained frozen, the name echoing in his ears like a forgotten nightmare suddenly resurrected. Gabriel Johnson. A spotlight illuminated the stage as she emerged, and James felt the air leave his lungs. The transformation was extraordinary, not just the expected passage of 15 years, but a complete metamorphosis. Gone was the uncertain young chef in borrowed designer clothes. In her place stood a commanding presence in a tailored midnight blue gown that hugged her curves with elegant precision. Diamond earrings caught the light as she moved, her once wild curls now styled in sophisticated waves that framed her face. But it was her expression that struck him most profoundly, absolute confidence radiating from every feature. This was a woman who feared nothing and no one, a woman who had built something lasting. The audience rose in spontaneous standing ovation, genuine admiration flowing toward the stage. James remained rooted to his spot, unable to join the applause, unable to tear his gaze away from the woman he had discarded. "It is an honor to stand before you tonight," Gabrielle began, her voice melodious and strong, carrying effortlessly through the ballroom. "When I began my journey, a girl from Harlem with big dreams and little else, I never imagined I would be addressing you today." James swallowed hard, his own cruel words returning to haunt him. "You'll always be just the girl from the kitchen." "Success rarely follows a straight line," Gabrielle continued, commanding the room with practiced ease. "Sometimes the greatest obstacles divert us onto unexpected paths that turn out to be exactly where we were meant to be." As she spoke about her culinary philosophy and business approach, James stared at the information projected on the screen behind her. Over $200 million in annual revenue, 500 employees, imminent international expansion to London and Tokyo, a foundation that had already granted more than $2 million in scholarships. His own company's latest valuation, by contrast, had plummeted to less than $30 million, with creditors circling like vultures. "But none of this compares to my greatest achievement." Gabrielle's smile widened, genuine warmth replacing her professional demeanor. "I'd like to thank my extraordinary 15-year-old sons, Marcus, Malcolm, and Miles, who teach me daily that family and integrity are the most valuable ingredients in any recipe for success. The spotlight widened to include 3 tall teenage boys who joined her on stage, handsome, poised, and unmistakably related. James gripped the edge of a nearby table for support, his knees suddenly weak. The resemblance was striking, not just to Gabrielle, but to himself, to his father, to the Woodley lineage stretching back generations. Each boy had inherited the distinctive steel-blue eyes that had defined his family for generations, now gazing out at the audience with confidence that James himself had once possessed. While the crowd applauded the family ensemble, James observed in stunned silence. Malcolm stood tallest, his posture suggesting the natural authority of a future CEO. Marcus radiated creative energy, his stance slightly more relaxed but equally assured. Miles carried himself with artistic elegance, his slender pianist's fingers resting lightly on his mother's shoulder. His sons, the sons he had rejected, the heirs he had never known. During the reception that followed, James couldn't drag his eyes away from Gabrielle and the boys, now surrounded by admirers. He watched Marcus discussing culinary techniques with a renowned French chef, gesturing enthusiastically about flavor profiles. He observed Malcolm analyzing a business proposal with a silver-haired investor, asking pointed questions that made the older man nod with respect. He witnessed Miles charming a group of conservatory directors with his knowledge of classical composition. Each demonstration of their exceptional talents was another twist of the knife. These remarkable young men should have carried his name, should have been his legacy. Driven by a mixture of regret, curiosity, and perhaps opportunism, James finally gathered his courage and approached when Gabrielle momentarily stepped away to retrieve a drink from a passing server. "Gabrielle," he said, his voice betraying his nervousness. She froze, the mineral water suspended mid-air. Slowly she turned, her eyes registering first shock, then recognition, and finally something more complex, a mixture of contempt and absolute indifference. "James Woodley," she responded, her tone neutral, as if pronouncing the name of a casual acquaintance. "What a surprise." "You look stunning," he stammered, "and very successful. I always knew you had potential." Gabrielle's laugh was sharp and cutting. "No, you didn't. You said, and I'm quoting, that I would always be just the girl from the kitchen, without refinement, without connections, without a future. Interesting memory I have, isn't it?" James paled. "I was young, arrogant, stupid, and now you're what? Old, arrogant, and stupid." Gabrielle took a sip of her water, perfectly composed. "I heard Woodley Investments is experiencing difficulties. Something about risky cryptocurrency investments? Fascinating how the wheel turns." Before James could respond, Malcolm approached. "Mom, the food and wine editor wants to discuss that cover profile." James stared at the young man, seeing himself reflected in every feature of the youthful face. "Malcolm, this is James Woodley, an old acquaintance from New York," Gabrielle said calmly. "Mr. Woodley, this is my son Malcolm. He's just been early accepted to Harvard business program." Malcolm extended his hand politely, recognizing no special significance in the meeting. "Pleasure to meet you, sir." James shook his son's hand, stunned by the formality of the moment. "The pleasure is mine. Harvard? Impressive." "I have my mother to thank," Malcolm smiled. "She built everything from nothing, you know? From a small kitchen in Boston to all this. She's the definition of extraordinary." At that moment, Marcus and Miles joined them, equally courteous and completely unaware of the true identity of the man before them. "You are extraordinary," James murmured, looking from one to another. "They are," Gabrielle agreed. "And if you'll excuse us, we have a celebration to enjoy. Come, boys." As they walked away, James called after her, "Gabrielle, please, we need to talk." She turned back, one eyebrow raised. Photographers around them captured the moment of tension, flashes firing rapidly. "Talk? Now?" She checked the elegant watch on her wrist. 15 years, 3 months, and 17 days later? Your punctuality is impressive, James." The murmuring in the room grew as more people noticed the intensity of their interaction. "They're my sons," he said, low enough that the boys couldn't hear, but loud enough for nearby guests. Silence spread like a wave. Gabrielle maintained absolute composure, while James's face revealed every emotion. "No," she answered clearly. "They're my sons. You're just the man who gave me a $50,000 check to solve the problem. Remember? But don't worry, I tore up the check. Some problems are worth keeping." While the world around continued to move, two people remained frozen in time. She, holding an empire built with determination. He, holding only the ruins of what he had inherited. And between them, three young men who represented both the past and the future that James Woodley had thrown away. The words hung in the air like shards of glass. James stood frozen, the color draining from his face as Gabrielle's declaration reverberated through the now silent ballroom. The triplets, momentarily confused, looked from their mother to this stranger, their expressions shifting from polite interest to dawning comprehension. "What is she talking about?" Miles asked, his artistic sensitivity immediately detecting the underlying tension. James looked at the boys, his eyes pleading. "I'm your—" "A man who made a terrible error in judgment," Gabrielle interrupted, her voice now trembling with contained emotion. "A man who looked at a talented chef from Harlem and decided she wasn't worthy of his precious Woodley name. A man who's realizing, 15 years too late, what he threw away." The entire room had fallen silent, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Restaurant critics, celebrity chefs, and culinary investors stood motionless, cocktails and canapés forgotten as they witnessed what was quickly becoming the most talked-about moment in food and wine gala history. "You're our father?" Marcus asked directly, his intelligence quickly connecting the dots. James nodded, unable to form words. "The father who never wanted to know us? Who said Mom had no future?" Malcolm added, his tone analytical but cutting. "The one who left her pregnant and alone in New York?" Miles completed, tears glistening in his eyes identical to the man standing before them. James found himself surrounded by the consequences of his actions, exposed not only to the sons he had never known, but to the social and business elite gathered at the event. "I've changed," he whispered desperately. Gabrielle smiled sadly. "No, James, you went bankrupt. That's not the same thing." A photographer from Bon Appetit captured the moment. Gabrielle standing tall in her designer gown, the three poised teenagers flanking her protectively, and James Woodley, once the golden boy of Manhattan society, looking diminished in his expensive but slightly dated suit. "Boys," Gabrielle said calmly, "I think it's time we enjoyed the rest of our evening with people who actually chose to be part of our journey." She placed a hand on Miles's shoulder, sensing his emotional distress. "We can discuss this further tomorrow." As they turned to leave, James reached out, his fingers brushing Gabrielle's arm. "Please, just 5 minutes." 15 years, she repeated, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You had 15 years to claim 5 minutes with your sons. Your timing has always been atrocious, James." By morning, the confrontation had exploded across social media and traditional press. Gabrielle's phone began ringing at 6:30, her publicist breathlessly reporting that every major outlet wanted exclusive comments on the Woodley scandal. In the adjoining suite of their hotel, the triplets gathered in Malcolm's room, their expressions solemn as they processed the previous night's revelation. "Why didn't you tell us who he really was?" Malcolm asked when Gabrielle joined them, his pragmatic mind seeking concrete answers. Gabrielle sighed heavily, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Because I didn't want his rejection to define you. I didn't want you looking in the mirror every morning and seeing the man who thought you weren't good enough." "But he's rich, isn't he?" Marcus questioned, his chef's precision needing all ingredients accounted for. Or was. "The money was never the point," Gabrielle explained, choosing her words carefully. "Woodley is a name that opens doors in Manhattan. He didn't just reject me. He decided that you, without even being born yet, weren't worthy of that privilege. Miles, always the most emotionally attuned, moved to sit beside his mother. "I'm glad we're Johnsons. We built something better." Gabrielle pulled him close, her eyes meeting those of her other sons. Being a Johnson means creating your own legacy, not inheriting someone else's mistakes. Across town, in a considerably less luxurious hotel room, James Woodley stared at his phone. 37 missed calls, from his lawyer, his remaining business partners, and most alarmingly, from his current fiancée, Sophia Bellingham, whose family connections he had been counting on to help stabilize his finances. The Wall Street Journal had already published an article online. Woodley heir confronted by abandoned sons at culinary gala. His lawyer had texted that Vanity Fair was preparing a feature comparing Gabrielle's rise with his decline. In desperate need of damage control, James sent a bouquet of rare orchids to Gabrielle's hotel suite with a handwritten note. "Please allow me to explain. 15 years is too long. We need to talk, for their sake." The flowers were returned to his hotel within hours, the card unmarked but for a single word in Gabrielle's handwriting: "No." Undeterred, James sent emails, left voicemails, even attempted to approach her at a book signing event the following day, only to be politely but firmly intercepted by security. 3 days after the gala, the real crisis hit. The Wall Street Journal published a detailed article comparing the financial trajectories of both parties. Gabrielle Johnson, starting from nothing to build an empire valued at over $200 million, versus James Woodley, an heir who had squandered a family fortune through imprudent decisions, leaving Woodley Investments teetering on insolvency. The article included a particularly devastating infographic showing the growth of Trilogy Enterprises alongside the decline of Woodley Investments, 2 lines moving in opposite directions over 15 years, intersecting precisely at the present moment. That evening, as James contemplated the ruins of both his reputation and finances in his hotel bar, his phone vibrated with a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Trilogy offices tomorrow, 10 a.m. Security will expect you." The message was unsigned, but James knew immediately. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. The Trilogy Chicago offices occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building. James arrived 15 minutes early, his Zegna suit, one of the last remaining from better days, freshly pressed. The receptionist led him to a minimalist conference room where 3 identical teenagers waited, their expressions guarded and appraising. "Mr. Woodley," Malcolm spoke first, clearly the designated leader. "We appreciate you coming." "Thank you for seeing me," James replied, his voice catching slightly as he took in the sight of his sons up close. "I've been hoping—" "This isn't for you," Malcolm interrupted, his tone businesslike. "We made this decision for ourselves. Mom doesn't know we contacted you." James nodded, suddenly understanding. "She didn't want you to meet me." "She said it would be our choice when we're adults," Marcus explained. "We decided we couldn't wait. We have questions that need answers." For 2 tense hours, the triplets methodically interrogated their biological father, not about feelings or apologies, but about medical history, hereditary traits, and the Woodley genealogy that was technically part of their heritage. "Any history of heart disease?" Malcolm asked, making notes on a tablet. "Grandparents' cause of death?" Marcus followed up. "Are there musicians in your family?" Miles inquired, the first question that seemed personally meaningful to him. James attempted repeatedly to express remorse, to offer financial compensation, even suggesting that the boys might consider adopting the Woodley surname to preserve the legacy. Miles laughed first, a sound so similar to James's own that it startled him. "Preserve which legacy? The almost bankrupt company?" Marcus added with cutting precision. "The Johnson name is on the best restaurant lists in the country." Malcolm concluded definitively, "Our mother transformed Johnson into a synonym for excellence. Why would we trade that for Woodley?" Each word was a blow, each rejection a mirror of what he had done 15 years earlier. James realized with growing despair that his sons had inherited their mother's resilience and none of his entitlement. When Gabrielle finally entered the room, James was emotionally devastated, not just by the rejection, but by the understanding that his children had inherited their mother's perspicacity and no need for him whatsoever. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked calmly, her expression unreadable. "Gabrielle, please," James implored. "I want to be part of their lives. I can offer connections, opportunities." "What connections, James?" She smiled without humor. "Half of Wall Street won't take your calls now. And opportunities? Malcolm has 3 Ivy League universities competing for him. Marcus just won Young Chef of the Year. Miles will audition for Juilliard next month." James looked at his sons, desperately searching for some opening, some need he could fulfill. "I can be a father to them." 15 years too late, Gabrielle responded. "They don't need a father. They needed one when you abandoned us. Now? They're exceptional young men, formed with values you clearly don't possess." The final blow came when James, desperate, offered, "I could invest in Trilogy. I still have some funds, international contacts." Gabrielle laughed genuinely for the first time. "James, my financial director turned down 3 acquisition offers last week, including one for $350 million. We don't need your money. In fact," she discreetly checked her watch, "I have a video conference in 5 minutes with Tokyo investors about our Asian expansion." When all 4 Johnsons stood simultaneously, a quartet united by appearance and purpose, James finally comprehended the magnitude of his loss. It wasn't just a family he had rejected, but an entire legacy. "What if I really have changed?" he asked, one final desperate attempt. Gabrielle studied him for a moment, as she would an ingredient of questionable quality. "Then prove it. Not to us. We don't need that proof. Prove it to yourself, by becoming someone better than the man who abandoned us." While the flashes of cameras captured the moment when the Johnson Empire confronted the Woodley Empire, no one could predict that the next day's headlines would not only destroy James's reputation, but also open doors for an even more intimate and devastating confrontation. The headlines exploded across both traditional and social media by dawn. Woodley heir confronted by abandoned chef and sons dominated the news cycle, complete with dramatic photos capturing James's shell-shocked expression contrasted with Gabrielle's composed dignity. As morning shows dissected the confrontation, Americans awakened to a modern Cinderella story with a twist. The princess had saved herself and built a castle while the prince lost his kingdom. James awoke to a hotel phone ringing incessantly. 37 missed calls on his cell phone flashed on the screen beside empty whiskey glasses. His lawyer, Richard Stern, sounded uncharacteristically flustered when James finally answered, "It's everywhere, James. Every outlet. This couldn't have come at a worse time with the SEC investigation pending. Blackstone is pulling out of the real estate deal, and Sophia's father just called demanding the return of the engagement ring." James pressed his palm against his throbbing temple. "Sophia called off the engagement?" Her exact words were, "I won't be stepmother to children older than my Birkin collection. The press is camped outside your apartment. Stay where you are." Across town, in her penthouse suite, Gabrielle sat surrounded by her sons, fielding calls from her executive team. The boys appeared subdued, processing the previous day's confrontation. "The stock is up 12%, her CFO reported. "Apparently your life story is driving interest in the brand. Good Morning America wants an exclusive." "Decline politely," Gabrielle instructed. "This isn't a marketing opportunity, it's our life." She ended the call and turned to her sons. "How are you feeling this morning?" The triplets exchanged glances before Malcolm spoke. "We've been talking, Mom. We want to meet him again, not for him, but for us." Gabrielle felt her stomach tighten. "Are you sure?" "He abandoned us. He said horrible things." "We know," Marcus replied, "but we need to understand our own history, the full picture." Miles nodded. Even the ugly parts belong to us. Studying their faces, so similar to the man who had broken her heart, Gabrielle recognized the determination she had instilled in them. "All right. On your terms, not his." James's trembling fingers struggled with his tie as he prepared for the meeting at Trilogy Chicago. Despite everything, hope flickered. A chance to connect with his sons, perhaps salvage something from the wreckage of his life. The Wall Street Journal article comparing their financial trajectories lay crumpled on the hotel room floor, its infographic a brutal visualization of their divergent paths. The Trilogy offices exuded understated elegance, modern without being cold, sophisticated without pretension. James was led to a conference room where the triplets waited, their expressions neither hostile nor welcoming. For 2 hours, they questioned him about medical history, hereditary traits, and the Woodley genealogy. "Any heart conditions?" Malcolm asked clinically. "No, but my father had high blood pressure," James replied, desperate to move beyond medical cataloging. "Boys, I want you to know how sorry I am. If I could go back—" "We're not interested in hypotheticals," Malcolm interrupted. "What about stroke? Alzheimer's?" James felt like a specimen being dissected. "My grandfather lived to 92 with all his faculties. Listen, I know I have no right to ask, but I'd like to be part of your lives going forward. Perhaps you could consider taking the Woodley name, to preserve the legacy." Miles laughed first, the sound so reminiscent of James's own that it startled him. "Preserve which legacy? The almost bankrupt company?" Marcus added with surgical precision. "The Johnson name is on the best restaurant lists in the country." Malcolm delivered the final blow. "Our mother transformed Johnson into a synonym for excellence. Why would we trade that for Woodley?" Each rejection mirrored what he had done 15 years earlier. James realized with mounting despair that his sons had inherited their mother's resilience and perspective, not his entitlement. When Gabrielle entered, her tailored navy suit projecting authority and success, James felt the full weight of his miscalculation. She wasn't the desperate young chef he had dismissed. She was a force who had rebuilt herself into something magnificent, while his inherited advantages crumbled in his hands. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked quietly. "Gabriel, please," he implored. "I want to be part of their lives. I can offer connections, opportunities." "What connections, James?" Her smile held no warmth. "Half of Wall Street won't take your calls now. And opportunities? Malcolm has 3 Ivy League universities competing for him. Marcus just won Young Chef of the Year. Miles will audition for Juilliard next month." James looked desperately at his sons, searching for some opening, some need he could fulfill. "I can be a father to them." 15 years too late, Gabrielle responded. "They don't need a father. They needed one when you abandoned us. Now, they're exceptional young men, formed with values you clearly don't possess." The final blow came when James, desperate, offered, "I could invest in Trilogy. I still have some funds, international contacts." Gabrielle laughed genuinely for the first time. "James, my financial director turned down 3 acquisition offers last week, including one for $350 million. We don't need your money." She checked her watch discreetly. "I have a video conference in 5 minutes with Tokyo investors about our Asian expansion." When all 4 Johnsons stood simultaneously, a quartet united by appearance and purpose, James finally comprehended the magnitude of his loss. It wasn't just a family he had rejected, but an entire legacy. "What if I really have changed?" he asked, one final desperate attempt. Gabrielle studied him for a moment, as she would an ingredient of questionable quality. "Then prove it. Not to us. We don't need that proof. Prove it to yourself by becoming someone better than the man who abandoned us." At the door, she paused and turned one last time. "You know what's ironic, James? If you had stayed with us, you would have had part of all this. But you chose the Woodley name above everything else, and now you don't even have that." The following weeks unfolded like a fever dream for James. His fiancée publicly ended their engagement. The SEC investigation into Woodley investments intensified. Former clients filed lawsuits. His apartment, once featured in Architectural Digest, was listed for sale to cover mounting debts. Meanwhile, from afar, he watched the Johnson family thrive. Social media showed the triplets accompanying Gabrielle to Tokyo for the grand opening of Trilogy's first international location. Business publications praised the expansion strategy. Fashion magazines photographed Gabrielle and her sons at charity galas, their coordinated outfits and easy smiles suggesting unshakable familial bonds. On the triplets' 16th birthday, celebrated with a charity gala that raised millions for young chefs from underprivileged communities, James sent 3 identical letters, not asking forgiveness or inclusion, but simply acknowledging Gabrielle's extraordinary work in raising 3 exceptional young men. The letters were returned unopened with a single note from Gabrielle. "It's not about forgiveness, James. It's about moving forward. I suggest you do the same." That evening, James sat alone in his drastically downsized apartment, staring at the returned envelopes. The television murmured in the background, showing footage of the Johnson Charity Gala. The camera lingered on Malcolm discussing scholarship initiatives with university presidents, Marcus demonstrating cooking techniques to disadvantaged youth, and Miles performing an original composition that had guests dabbing at their eyes. In that moment, James understood the true magnitude of what he had lost, not just financially, but spiritually. He had rejected not only Gabrielle but the chance to be part of something authentic and meaningful. His empire had been built on inheritance and privilege. Hers was constructed through resilience and vision. His phone rang, his lawyer with more bad news about creditors and assets. As James listened to the litany of financial woes, he watched Gabrielle on the screen accepting an award, her sons standing proudly beside her. Her closing words carried clearly through the speaker. "Success isn't measured by what you acquire, but by what you create that outlasts you." And so she moved forward, not with bitterness or thirst for revenge, but with the serene confidence of a woman who had transformed the most painful rejection into her greatest triumph. Gabrielle Johnson's true success wasn't measured in millions, restaurants, or awards, but in the extraordinary family she had built, a legacy that Woodley money could never buy. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.